August 15th. I had always dreamed of escaping the relentless hum of city life, so when I finally bought that old yacht, I decided to spend a night alone on it. The lake where I anchored was isolated, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to swallow up any sound. I looked around at the calm waters and felt a twinge of excitement mixed with a hint of apprehension. The sun was setting, casting an orange hue across the lake. As the light faded, the water began to shimmer with an eerie glow. The gentle rocking of the yacht seemed almost soothing at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone in a place that was more than just quiet. I set up a small camp inside the yacht, lit a few candles, and settled into a corner with a book. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional splash of fish jumping. Yet, as darkness fully enveloped the lake, a chill crept into the air, making the calm feel more like an impending threat. I brushed it off as just nerves. After all, I was here to find some solitude, not to be scared by the natural quiet of the night. But deep down, a nagging sense of unease was growing stronger with every passing minute. August 16th. The night had fallen completely, and with it, the eerie silence was pierced by faint, unsettling sounds. At first, they were just whispers of the wind, but soon I began hearing what seemed like footsteps crunching through the underbrush on the shore. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the natural noises of the forest. The yacht's cabin was dimly lit by the lanterns I had set up, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. I peered through the small window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. The gentle rocking of the yacht now felt like a heartbeat, growing faster with my rising anxiety. Each time I heard a sound, my heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was probably just an animal or some natural occurrence, but the frequency of the noises made my skin crawl. The forest seemed to close in on me, and I could almost sense eyes watching from the darkness. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the deck. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing nothing but the rippling water and the towering trees. But the feeling of being watched persisted, wrapping around me like a cold, invisible hand. August 17th. The eerie quiet had become unbearable, so I decided to investigate the sounds I'd been hearing. I took a small dinghy from the yacht and paddled cautiously towards the shore, guided only by the weak light of my flashlight. The dense trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying ominously in the breeze. As I reached the shoreline, I spotted a figure stumbling through the underbrush. It was a person, disheveled and clearly in distress. My heart raced with a mixture of relief and trepidation as I approached, the flashlight's beam revealing their pale, frightened face. They looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Help me," the stranger gasped, voice trembling. They explained they had been lost in the woods for hours, unable to find their way back. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts warning me of potential danger, but the desperation in their eyes won out. I guided them back to the yacht, where they gratefully accepted some food and water. As they settled down, their fear slowly subsided. I tried to relax, but the strange sounds had stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. The night felt oddly different now, as if something unseen had shifted in the darkness. August 18th. The morning brought a false sense of normalcy as the sun rose over the lake. The stranger, who introduced themselves as Mark, seemed more at ease now. We chatted about the previous night's events, and Mark told me he had been camping alone nearby. It sounded plausible, but there was something off about his story. As we talked, Mark mentioned seeing strange lights in the woods before he got lost. His description matched the eerie glow I had seen from the yacht the previous night. I felt a shiver run down my spine, realizing that the lights could have been the source of those unsettling noises. Mark's story was beginning to align with the fears I had dismissed. By midday, Mark seemed eager to leave. He thanked me for my help and quickly packed his belongings. As he prepared to depart, he gave me a strange look, almost as if he knew something I didn't. The way he glanced at the surrounding woods made me uneasy, as if he was afraid of something lurking just out of sight. After Mark left, I decided to explore the area where he had been found. The forest was dense, with twisted trees and thick underbrush that made it difficult to navigate. I stumbled upon a small clearing with unusual markings on the ground, almost like a ritualistic symbol. The discovery made my heart race as I realized how close I had been to something sinister. That night, as I lay in the yacht, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence was heavier than before, and the strange occurrences of the past few days seemed to have left a lingering sense of dread. I hoped that tomorrow would bring clarity, but deep down, I feared that I had merely scratched the surface of something much darker. September 15th. The sun was setting as I boarded the Eclipse, a luxury cruise ship that promised a week of opulence and adventure on the open seas. The ship was a marvel of modern engineering, with its sleek lines and gleaming decks reflecting the fading light. Excitement buzzed through the air as passengers like me embarked on what was supposed to be a memorable voyage. The grand entrance was lined with shimmering chandeliers and plush carpets, adding to the sense of grandeur. The ship's interior was a blend of classic elegance and contemporary design, featuring lavish lounges and a lavish dining hall. I marveled at the luxury, but a nagging feeling of unease began to creep in as I settled into my cabin. As the ship set sail, I wandered around the deck, taking in the expansive views of the ocean. The vastness of the water was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, its surface glistening under the setting sun. The gentle rocking of the ship was soothing, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite place. During the captain's welcome speech, he spoke of the ship's history and its state-of-the-art features, but there was an offhand comment about the Eclipse's previous voyages that caught my attention. He mentioned that the ship had a long history of providing unforgettable experiences, but his words were tinged with a hint of something unsaid. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd, but it was quickly dismissed as nerves. As evening descended, the ship's atmosphere grew more refined, with elegant dinners and entertainment filling the night. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Conversations around me seemed subdued, and I noticed a few passengers exchanging glances that suggested they were sharing unspoken fears. The opulence of the ship did little to mask the growing sense of discomfort. The evening brought a formal dinner in the grand dining hall of the Eclipse. The room was adorned with luxurious decor, chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over the elegant tables. Despite the opulence, a strange unease seemed to hover in the air, as though the ship's splendor was masking a deeper, darker truth. The dining hall was abuzz with conversations, but a subtle tension was palpable. The crew moved with practiced grace, their smiles too perfect, their eyes occasionally darting to the corners of the room. As I took my seat, I overheard snippets of conversations about the ship's history, strange occurrences, disappearances, and ghostly sightings from past voyages. The stories seemed like whispers of superstition, yet they added to the growing sense of discomfort. Midway through dinner, an inexplicable chill swept through the hall. The temperature dropped noticeably, and several guests shivered despite the ambient warmth. The lights flickered briefly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. A collective murmur of concern rippled through the diners, but the staff assured everyone it was a minor electrical issue. The evening's entertainment was a live performance, but the atmosphere remained unsettling. The musicians played with a professionalism that felt almost mechanical. The usual charm of a live show was lost in the context of the ship's eerie ambiance. As the night wore on, strange occurrences became more frequent. Cutlery moved on its own, glasses wobbled without explanation, and a distant, haunting melody seemed to drift through the corridors. I decided to take a stroll on the deck to clear my mind. The night was calm, with the stars twinkling above and the ocean stretching into the darkness. Yet, the serenity was deceptive. As I walked, I heard faint, ghostly whispers carried by the wind, and shadows seemed to flicker just beyond the edge of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Returning to my cabin, I found a note slipped under the door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the message cryptic. The past never rests. The note only deepened my sense of unease. I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that the ship held secrets far darker than its luxurious facade suggested. As I prepared for bed, I resolved to investigate further. The peculiar incidents of the evening were too significant to ignore. The ship's history and the whispers of the past were beginning to intertwine in a way that made me question what I might uncover if I continued to dig deeper. As the days passed, the atmosphere aboard the Eclipse grew increasingly tense. The strange occurrences continued, and I could sense that something was deeply wrong. Determined to uncover the truth, I began exploring more of the ship's less frequented areas, hoping to find some clue to explain the growing unease. One afternoon, while wandering through the lower decks, I stumbled upon a door that was slightly ajar. The area was dimly lit, with the only light coming from a flickering overhead bulb. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously pushed the door open, revealing a small, cluttered storage room. Dusty furniture and old equipment were strewn about, but what caught my eye was an old, locked chest nestled in a corner. With some effort, I managed to pry open the chest, revealing a collection of old photographs, letters, and faded journals. As I sifted through the items, I realized that they belonged to previous passengers of the Eclipse. The photographs showed a range of people, families, couples, and individuals, some of whom had looks of anxiety or distress etched into their faces. The letters were filled with cryptic messages and references to unexplained events on the ship. One letter stood out in particular. It was a desperate plea for help from a passenger who had reported seeing ghostly apparitions and experiencing disturbing dreams. The letter ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. The journals provided even more unsettling details. They described bizarre occurrences, such as objects moving on their own, eerie sounds echoing through the ship, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. The final entries were particularly chilling, recounting how the ship's crew had started to act strangely, and how passengers began disappearing one by one. As I read through the documents, a pattern began to emerge. It seemed that the eclipse had a dark history of hauntings and disappearances spanning decades. The ship had been involved in numerous incidents that were never fully explained, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and restless spirits. The sense of dread grew stronger as I pieced together the information. It became clear that the ship was not merely haunted. It was a vessel of torment and despair, with a history of evil that had been allowed to fester over time. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the weight of the ship's dark past bearing down on me. I knew that I needed to find a way to confront whatever was haunting the eclipse before it was too late. With the knowledge I had gathered, I prepared to face the source of the ship's malevolent presence. The clues pointed to a confrontation with the spirits trapped aboard, and I knew that this would be my only chance to end the cycle of fear and suffering that had plagued the eclipse for so long. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured back to the lower decks, where the eerie atmosphere had been most palpable. I returned to the hidden room I had discovered earlier, the one filled with old notes and sketches of ghostly occurrences. This time, I felt a sense of urgency. Something had to be done before the ship's haunting past claimed more victims. The room was exactly as I had left it, but the spectral figures were more vivid now. They appeared almost tangible, their forms shimmering with a ghostly light. As I stepped inside, the figures turned to face me, their eyes filled with an intense sadness and pleading. They seemed to be reaching out, trying to communicate something crucial. Among the figures, I recognized the woman from the photograph I had found in the chest. She floated closer, her eyes locked onto mine. Through a series of silent gestures and emotional expressions, she conveyed that the ship's curse was tied to the unresolved suffering of those who had died under mysterious circumstances. I understood then that the only way to break the curse was to bring these spirits closure. I gathered the old documents and photographs, placing them on a makeshift altar in the room. The spirits hovered around the items, their forms growing brighter, as if they were drawing strength from the evidence of their past lives. As I finished arranging the items, a sudden, intense cold swept through the room. The spectral figures began to fade, their expression shifting from sorrow to peace. A soft, otherworldly light filled the room, and the oppressive feeling that had haunted me lifted. The eclipse seemed to sigh with relief, the haunted tension dissipating as the spirits found their rest. With the curse lifted, the ship resumed its voyage with a newfound tranquility, and the sense of dread that had gripped me was finally gone. October 1st. The crisp autumn air was a welcome change from the sweltering summer heat as I boarded the grand cruise ship, Elysium. I had won a contest for a free voyage on this luxurious vessel, a prize that promised a week of relaxation and adventure on the high seas. The ship's opulent interior and the promise of new experiences had me excited. Yet, there was a strange excitement in the air, as if the ship itself was waiting for something. As we set sail, the ship's crew greeted us with friendly smiles and promises of a memorable journey. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the deck as the Elysium cut through the darkening waters. The ship's grandeur seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of the vast ocean. I took in the sweeping views, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation as the ship ventured further into the unknown. The evening brought a formal dinner in the grand dining hall, where the elegance of the surroundings did little to ease the subtle discomfort I felt. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, an unspoken tension hanging in the air. The other passengers seemed to share my unease, though no one spoke of it openly. Conversations flowed awkwardly as we tried to ignore the undercurrent of anxiety. As I retired to my cabin later that night, a sudden chill swept through the room. I wrapped myself in a blanket, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread. The gentle rocking of the ship was oddly calming, yet there was a sense of something lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. I couldn't ignore the whispers of unease that seemed to echo through the corridors of the Elysium. The first night passed with a restless sleep, filled with fragmented dreams of shadowy figures and distant cries. When I awoke, the sun was already high, but the lingering feeling of apprehension remained. The day promised a range of activities, but my thoughts were preoccupied with the unsettling atmosphere that had enveloped the ship. The Elysium seemed to come alive with activity as the sun rose, and the initial unease of the previous night faded into a more relaxed atmosphere. Passengers explored the ship, enjoying the lavish amenities and the promise of exotic destinations. Despite the lively environment, a subtle, almost imperceptible tension lingered, like a shadow cast over our merriment. I decided to take a stroll around the deck, hoping to clear my mind and enjoy the crisp sea air. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast expanse of blue that seemed both comforting and isolating. As I walked, I noticed that a few passengers were acting strangely. Whispers exchanged behind closed doors, furtive glances, and an air of secrecy that seemed out of place. Later that afternoon, I joined a group of passengers for a guided tour of the ship's more exclusive areas. The tour guide, an elegant woman with a reserved demeanor, spoke of the ship's history and its many renovations. She mentioned that the Elysium had been a vessel of great mystery, with a few unexplained incidents in its past. Her words, though delivered lightly, sent a shiver down my spine. The feeling of unease returned with renewed intensity. As the day turned to evening, the ship's atmosphere grew even more peculiar. During dinner, the staff seemed unusually quiet, their smiles a bit too forced. The food was exquisite, but there was a disconcerting lack of conversation among the passengers. The dining hall felt colder than usual, and a sense of foreboding settled over us. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more frequently, as if expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. That night, as I tried to sleep, I was disturbed by strange noises coming from the corridor outside my cabin. Soft, muffled voices and the sound of shuffling footsteps created a disorienting cacophony. I got up to investigate, but found nothing amiss. The corridor was empty, and the sounds had ceased. However, the unsettling feeling lingered, making it difficult for me to return to sleep. As I lay in bed, the shadows of the cabin seemed to move with a life of their own. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The night stretched on with an oppressive stillness, and the comfort of the ship's luxury felt like a thin veil hiding something darker beneath. The sense of dread that had been growing since the start of the voyage now felt like a tangible presence, enveloping me in its grip. The unsettling events of the previous night left me feeling disoriented and anxious. I decided to explore more of the ship in an attempt to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The Elysium was vast, and despite the grandeur of its design, I began to feel as if it were a labyrinth of secrets. In the morning, I ventured to the ship's library, a quiet place that seemed like a refuge from the growing unease. The library was elegantly decorated, with mahogany shelves lining the walls and comfortable armchairs arranged around a large fireplace. I settled into a chair with a book, hoping to lose myself in its pages and escape the strange atmosphere that plagued me. As I read, I overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby group of passengers. They spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions that had been reported on previous voyages of the Elysium. Though their words were speculative, they added to the growing sense of dread. I couldn't help but wonder if there was any truth to these rumors. By afternoon, I decided to take a break from the library and explore some of the less frequented areas of the ship. I wandered through the lower decks, where the opulence of the upper levels gave way to more utilitarian spaces. The corridors were dimly lit and eerily quiet, and I found myself navigating through narrow, winding hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. In one of these less traveled areas, I discovered a door slightly ajar, leading to what appeared to be a storage room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open, revealing a cluttered space filled with old furniture and dusty relics. Among the items, I found an antique chest tucked away in a corner. The chest was ornate, with intricate carvings and a heavy lock that had long since rusted over. Despite the age and decay of the chest, it seemed to radiate an aura of mystery. I hesitated, but eventually decided to open it, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, letters, and personal items that appeared to belong to past passengers or crew members. The photographs depicted scenes from earlier voyages, some of which showed passengers in places that seemed eerily similar to those I had explored. One photograph in particular caught my eye. It was a black and white image of a group of passengers standing in front of a ship's railing, their expressions solemn and distant. Among them was a man who looked strikingly familiar, though I couldn't place where I had seen him before. The letter found alongside the photograph was written in a hurried scrawl, with words like "help," "trapped," and "escape" scattered across the page. The discovery left me shaken. The sense of something sinister lurking beneath the ship's polished surface grew stronger. I felt as if I had stumbled upon a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. The photographs and letters seemed to tell a story of past passengers who had experienced similar feelings of dread and unease. As I left the storage room, I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The unease that had plagued me since the start of the voyage now seemed to be more than just a figment of my imagination. There was something deeply wrong with the Elysium, and I had to find out what it was before it was too late. The evening approached, and with it, a renewed sense of apprehension. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was hiding something from us, something that would only be revealed in the darkest corners of its history. As I prepared for another night on the Elysium, I knew that my quest for answers was far from over. The discovery of the antique chest had left me deeply unsettled. I spent the remainder of the day sifting through its contents, trying to make sense of the photographs and letters I had found. Each item seemed to hold a fragment of the ship's past, But there was one photograph in particular that caught my attention. It depicted a group of people dressed in early 20th century clothing, standing on the deck of what I assumed was the Elysium. Their expressions were somber, and a sense of melancholy seemed to radiate from the image. As evening approached, the atmosphere aboard the ship grew increasingly tense. The strange occurrences of the past few days seemed to coalesce into a palpable sense of dread. I was no longer just a passenger. I felt like a witness to something much larger and more sinister. The crew and other passengers continued to act oddly, their behavior becoming more erratic as the days went on. That night, as I attempted to sleep, I was again disturbed by the sounds of shuffling footsteps and muffled voices in the corridor. The noises were more insistent than before, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions. I got up, and with a growing sense of urgency, made my way to the source of the disturbance. My flashlight illuminated the empty corridors, but the sounds persisted, growing louder and more disconcerting. Determined to uncover the truth, I followed the sounds to a section of the ship that was not on any of the maps I had seen. The area was dimly lit and looked abandoned, with old dusty furnishings and cobwebs hanging from the corners. The air was musty, and the silence was almost deafening. I stumbled upon a small, unmarked door, slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, I was met with a sight that made my heart race. The room was filled with more antique items, but what caught my eye were the walls, covered in faded handwritten notes and sketches. They depicted disturbing scenes of the ship's history, including references to disappearances and ghostly apparitions. The notes were signed with various names, many of which matched those on the photographs I had found in the chest. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I could see my breath misting in the cold air, and a feeling of intense fear overwhelmed me. The whispers that had been faint and distant grew louder, converging into a cacophony of indecipherable voices. It felt as though the ship itself was alive with the memories of its haunted past, and that I had unwittingly become part of its dark narrative. The discovery of the hidden room had left me shaken, but I felt compelled to delve deeper into the ship's dark past. The notes and sketches on the walls painted a grim picture of the Elysium's history, suggesting that this was not the first time something sinister had occurred on board. The more I read, the more it became clear that the ship was haunted by the spirits of those who had suffered and vanished under mysterious circumstances. The day was spent trying to piece together the puzzle. I found that the names on the notes matched those of passengers from earlier voyages. Each entry detailed strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, and, most chillingly, disappearances that were never resolved. It became apparent that the Elysium was not merely a ship. It was a vessel cursed by its own dark history. As night fell, I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting the ship. Armed with the knowledge from the notes and a steely resolve, I made my way back to the lower decks. The unsettling quiet of the ship was now a constant companion, and every creak and groan of the vessel seemed to amplify my growing fear. I headed towards the area where I had heard the noises before, hoping to uncover the source of the disturbances once and for all. The lower decks were shrouded in darkness, and the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the ship against the waves. I approached the hidden room again, this time with a stronger sense of purpose. As I opened the door, I was confronted by a chilling sight. The room was now filled with spectral figures, their forms translucent and shimmering with an eerie glow. They hovered silently, their eyes filled with sorrow and despair. One of the figures, a woman dressed in early 20th century attire, stepped forward. She reached out to me, her expression one of pleading sadness. Through a series of ghostly whispers and gestures, she conveyed the ship's tragic fate. The spirits of those who had died under mysterious circumstances were trapped, bound to the Elysium forever. In that moment, I understood the true nature of the curse that haunted the ship. It wasn't just about the unexplained events, but about the unresolved suffering of those who had perished. The ship was a prison for their restless souls, and there was no easy way to break the curse. The realization was overwhelming. I had uncovered the truth, but it came with the heavy burden of knowing that the ship's dark legacy was far from over. As the figures began to fade into the darkness, I felt a profound sadness for their plight. The Elysium would continue its voyage, carrying its tragic history with it, and I, as a witness to its haunting truth, would forever be marked by the experience.